Ever wonder what a man might do if he discovered that everything he'd built his life on was rooted in someone else's suffering? I'm reminded of an old rancher I knew years back in Montana, tough as boot leather, but fair right down to his bones. The kind of man who'd sooner go hungry than break his word. I still recall his weathered hands, cracked from decades of fence mending and cattle driving, as he told me about the day everything changed. He was out checking the south pasture, just routine work he'd done 1,000 times before, when his horse's hoof broke through what seemed like solid ground. What he found beneath that broken earth would test everything he thought he knew about his family, his land, and what kind of man he truly was. Now I reckon you and I both know that the measure of a man isn't found in what life hands him, but in what he does when the hard choices come calling. And brother, the choice that old rancher faced that day was about as hard as they come. Derek Langston rose before dawn, just as he had every day for the past 23 years. The March air bit cold through his flannel shirt as he stepped onto the porch, coffee mug warming his weathered hands. He surveyed the land that had been in his family for 3 generations, the rolling pastures, the weathered barn, the mountains rising blue in the distance. His father had passed the deed to him 7 years ago, along with a simple instruction: "Take care of it, son. It's not just land, it's our name." The morning chores waited for no man, regardless of how the knee ached or how little sleep the night had offered. Derek finished his coffee with a practiced swallow and set to work, moving with the efficient rhythm of a man who'd spent his life working with his hands. Inside the barn, he checked on the pregnant mare first. She was close now, maybe a day or 2 out. He ran calloused fingers along her swollen flank, feeling the foal shift beneath his touch. "Easy there, lady," he murmured, his voice gentle despite its gravelly depth. "You're doing just fine." He mixed her feed with the supplements Doc Jenkins had recommended, making sure she ate every bit before moving on to the rest of the morning's tasks. The barn needed mending. Again, the winter had been hard, with more snow than usual, and the southeast corner had taken damage. Derek gathered his tools, the familiar weight of the hammer a comfort in his grip. 3 hours later, with the sun climbing higher in the sky, the repair was solid. Not pretty, maybe, but it would hold. Derek wiped sweat from his brow with a bandana that had long ago faded from red to a dusty pink. That's when he heard the truck coming up the drive, the familiar rattle of Martin Green's old Ford. Martin had been the sheriff in Silver Creek for going on 30 years, and he'd been Derek's father's best friend for even longer. These days, he was more advisor than lawman, having passed most duties to his deputy last year, but he still wore the badge, and from the look on his face as he climbed out of the truck, today he was wearing it officially. "Derek," he nodded, hat in hand. "Got a minute?" "Always for you, Martin. Coffee's still hot." They settled at the kitchen table, the worn wood bearing the marks of decades of Langston family meals, discussions, and decisions. "How's that mare of yours doing?" Martin asked, accepting the steaming mug. "Close, real close. You didn't drive all the way out here to check on my horses, though." Martin chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No, I didn't. Got word that Marcus Cross is looking to buy up properties around the Silver Creek watershed, offering good money, too." Derek's face remained impassive, but his fingers tightened around his mug. "Not interested." "Figured as much. But there's more to it. The county approved his mining permit yesterday. He's claiming there's a silver vein running right under these properties." "Silver? Here. That's been played out for 70 years. Martin shrugged. "New technology," he says. "Can reach deeper than the old-timers could." Derek's eyes narrowed. "So he gets the mineral rights even if we don't sell?" "That's what the law says. But he needs access. Surface rights still belong to the property owners." And if we don't grant access? Martin sighed, his weathered face showing every one of his 68 years. He's got friends on the council, Derek. Has for years. They're talking about eminent domain for economic development. The kitchen fell silent, except for the tick of the old clock that had hung on the wall since Derek's grandfather's time. My father would roll over in his grave if I sold an inch of this land, Derek finally said, his voice steady. I know it. Just thought you should hear it from me first. Martin finished his coffee and stood. Town meeting tonight. 7 o'clock. Might want to be there. Derek nodded, walking his old friend back to the truck. They shook hands, a firm grip between men who measured each other by the strength of their word and the calluses on their palms. After Martin left, Derek returned to the barn, checking again on Lady before moving to the tack room. He needed to repair a bridle, and the familiar work would give him time to think. As he worked the leather with practiced hands, his mind turned over what Martin had said. Silver under the land. The Cross family making claims. It didn't sit right. The Crosses had always been the wealthiest family in the county, owners of the bank and half the businesses in town. But there had been bad blood between them and the Langstons going back to Derek's grandfather's time. Something about a land dispute that was settled decades ago, or so Derek had always believed. As evening approached, Derek finished the last of the day's chores, cleaned up, and put on his good shirt, the one without patches. The town meeting would be contentious. He could feel it in his bones, the same way he could feel a storm coming days before the clouds gathered. He was locking the house when he heard it, a faint, pained whicker from the barn. Lady? Derek hurried across the yard, lantern in hand. The mare was down, sides heaving, eyes wide with the beginning of labor. Easy girl, he murmured, setting down the lantern and kneeling beside her. I'm here now. The town meeting would have to wait. Some things were more important than politics and silver veins. Derek settled in for what might be a long night, his rough hands gentle on the mare's trembling flank. You and me, lady, he said softly as she strained. We'll see this through together. Outside, the last light faded from the sky, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, a lonesome sound that seemed to Derek like a warning. But maybe that was just the unease Martin's news had planted in him, growing like a weed he couldn't quite pull. Dawn found Derek in the barn, bleary-eyed but smiling. The foaling had gone well, a strong colt with a white blaze and 4 sound legs. Lady was resting now, her dark eyes watchful over her newborn. Derek had stayed with them through the night, dozing on a hay bale when he could, but mostly just keeping vigil. He'd missed the town meeting. Not that it mattered much. Martin would fill him in. Some battles couldn't be fought on your own terms or timeline. Life had a way of reminding a man of that. The crunch of tires on gravel pulled Derek from his thoughts. Stepping from the barn's dim interior into the morning light, he squinted at the 3 vehicles coming up his drive. A black SUV flanked by 2 pickup trucks, the kind of entrance meant to intimidate. The SUV stopped, and Marcus Cross stepped out. Despite being in his 60s, Cross moved with the confidence of a man who rarely heard the word no. His tailored suit looked out of place against the backdrop of Derek's weathered barn. 2 younger men, one Derek recognized as Cross's son, Robert, emerged from the pickup trucks. Langston, Cross called, as if they were old friends. Missed you at the meeting last night. Derek didn't move from where he stood. Had a mare foaling. She took priority. Cross smiled without warmth. Congratulations. Boy or girl? Colt, strong one? Good, good. Cross surveyed the property, his gaze calculating. Beautiful land you've got here. Been in your family, what, 3 generations now? You know it has. Derek's voice remained even. What brings you out this way, Marcus? Figure you'd be celebrating your mining permit. Something flashed in Cross's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that Derek knew about the permit. I thought I'd extend the courtesy of a personal visit. My offer to buy your property stands at twice its market value. That's more than fair. Not interested in selling. Cross sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. The council approved the access ordinance last night, 9-3. We'll be starting preliminary surveys next week. Thought you might want to reconsider, given the circumstances. What circumstances are those? Progress, Derek. The mine will bring jobs, tax revenue. Silver Creek hasn't seen this kind of opportunity in decades. Cross gestured toward the land. And the drilling, the equipment, the traffic. It'll disrupt your operation considerably. Might be easier to take the money and start fresh somewhere quieter. Derek felt heat rising in his chest, but kept his face impassive. This land's not for sale, not at any price. Cross's smile thinned. I was hoping we could be reasonable. The council's already approved the access permits. We have legal right to begin exploration. On my property? Without my permission? It's called eminent domain, Derek. For the greater good. Whose greater good? Yours? Derek took a step forward. My grandfather broke his back working this land. My father spent 50 years building what we have here. I won't be the one to sign it away. Robert Cross stepped forward, his face flushed. You don't have a choice, Langston. The decision's been made. Marcus placed a restraining hand on his son's arm. What Robert means is that fighting this will only cost you money you don't have. The outcome is inevitable. He pulled a folded document from his jacket. This is a formal notice. We begin survey work on Monday. I suggest you keep your animals clear of the south pasture. For their safety. Derek took the paper, but didn't look at it. This isn't over, Marcus. Actually, it is. Cross turned to leave, then paused. Your father was stubborn too. In the end, it didn't serve him well. The words hung in the air like a threat. After they left, Derek stood in the yard for a long moment, the paper crumpled in his fist. Something wasn't right about this. The silver mines had played out decades ago, everyone knew that, and the speed of the council's decision without proper public debate. It stank of corruption. Inside the house, he called Martin Green. They've already been there? Martin's voice sounded tired over the phone. I was coming out to warn you. What happened at that meeting, Martin? A heavy sigh. It wasn't much of a meeting, more like a coronation. Cross had it all arranged. Economic impact studies, job projections, tax revenue estimates. Half the council was already in his pocket. And the other half? Scared, mostly. Cross made it clear that opposing the mine meant opposing progress. Nobody wants to be branded as standing in the way of jobs. Derek paced the kitchen floor. This can't be legal. They can't just take access to private property for a private company's profit. They're calling it a public-private partnership. Martin's voice dropped lower. Listen, Derek, there's something else. Ellen Harrow voted against the ordinance. She stopped me after the meeting, said she has concerns about the whole operation. Ellen Harrow owned the local newspaper and sat on the town council. She was also one of the few people who consistently stood up to Marcus Cross. What kind of concerns? Derek asked. She wouldn't say exactly, just that some of the environmental impact studies didn't add up. She asked if you'd meet with her, privately. When and where? Her office, back entrance. Tonight at 8. After hanging up, Derek unfolded the notice Cross had given him. legal language couched in terms of progress and community benefit. The final paragraph caught his eye. Any interference with survey operations may result in civil and criminal penalties. That evening, Derek parked his truck behind the Silver Creek Gazette building. Ellen Harrow was waiting at the back door, her silver hair pulled back in its usual practical bun. "Thanks for coming," she said, leading him through the darkened office to a small conference room. Once inside, she locked the door and turned to face him. "What I'm about to show you doesn't leave this room. Understood?" Derek nodded. Ellen spread several maps and documents across the table. "These are the official geological surveys Cross submitted to the council. Notice anything unusual?" Derek studied them. "I'm no geologist." "Neither am I, but I know when numbers don't add up." She pointed to a section of data. "These core samples supposedly show rich silver deposits. But look at the dates. They're from 1978. That's over 40 years ago." "Exactly. And those samples were taken from the North Ridge, not anywhere near your property." Ellen pulled out another document. "This is a more recent survey, conducted by the State Geological Office last year. No mention of significant silver deposits in the entire county." Derek's eyes narrowed. "So Cross is lying about the silver?" "I think so. But why go to all this trouble if there's no silver?" Ellen looked at Derek intently. "What else is on your land that might be valuable?" Derek shook his head. "Nothing. Just pasture, timber, water rights." "Water rights," Ellen repeated. "Silver Creek feeds into the Johnson River, which is the primary water source for 3 counties. And who's been buying up water rights throughout the state for the past 5 years? Cross Industries," Derek said slowly, the pieces falling into place. "So this isn't about mining at all?" "I don't think so. I think it's about controlling the watershed." Ellen gathered the papers. "I need more evidence before I can publish anything. Can you hold them off for a week?" "I'll try." Derek stood to leave. "Thank you, Ellen." "Don't thank me yet. Cross has friends in high places. Be careful." As Derek drove home, the weight of what he'd learned settled on his shoulders. This wasn't just about his land anymore. It was about the entire community's future, and somehow he had to find a way to stop it. The next morning, Derek was checking fence lines when he saw them. Survey crews on his south pasture, already driving stakes into the ground. A sheriff's deputy stood nearby, watching. It had begun. For a week, Derek watched as Cross's survey crews methodically marked his land. They drove stakes with bright orange flags, took soil samples, and mapped every inch of the south pasture. The deputy was always present, arms crossed, making it clear that interference wouldn't be tolerated. Derek could only stand at a distance, jaw clenched, as strangers violated land his family had protected for generations. Word spread quickly through Silver Creek. At the feed store, conversations fell silent when Derek walked in. Old friends suddenly found the floor interesting, avoiding his eyes. Bill Carter, who'd supplied the Langston farm with feed for 30 years, handed Derek his order with an apologetic look. "Heard you're standing against the mine," Bill said quietly, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "Brave, but maybe not smart." "It's not about smart," Derek replied. "It's about right." Bill shook his head. "Cross called in my loan yesterday. Said the bank was reassessing its agricultural portfolio. 40 years without missing a payment, and suddenly my credit's in question." Derek understood the message. This is what happens to Cross's enemies and those who support them. Similar stories emerged across town. The hardware store owner found his deliveries mysteriously delayed. The diner that Ellen Harrow frequented had its health inspection scheduled 3 times in 2 weeks. The message was clear: oppose Cross, suffer the consequences. When Derek arrived home that afternoon, his mailbox contained a letter from Silver Creek Bank, Cross's bank. His mortgage, which had been in good standing for years, was being reviewed. The letter mentioned changing economic conditions and reassessment of collateral value. The subtext was unmistakable: cooperate or lose everything. That night, Derek sat alone at his kitchen table, papers spread before him: bank statements, property deeds, the mortgage document. The numbers were grim. He had savings, but not enough to withstand a prolonged fight against someone with Cross's resources. And if the bank called in his loan... Outside, rain began to fall, drumming on the tin roof. The sound, usually comforting, now seemed to echo the mounting pressure. In the barn, the new colt nickered for his mother, life continuing despite everything, demanding care regardless of human troubles. Derek poured himself 2 fingers of his father's whiskey, something he rarely did, and stared into the amber liquid. His father's voice seemed to whisper from the past: a man doesn't choose his battles based on whether he can win, but on whether he can live with himself if he doesn't fight. But what would fighting cost? Not just him, but others. Bill Carter's livelihood, Martin Green's position, Ellen Harrow's newspaper. Cross had made it clear he would punish anyone who stood with Derek. For the first time since his father's passing, Derek felt truly alone. The weight of responsibility, not just for the land, but for the consequences his decisions would have on others, pressed down on him. He took a swallow of whiskey, feeling its burn. "What would you do, Dad?" he whispered to the empty room. The house creaked in response, settling on its foundation as it had for over a century. Derek closed his eyes, the doubt creeping in. Maybe he was being selfish. Maybe fighting Cross would hurt more people than it would help. Maybe the right thing, the selfless thing, was to step aside. The thought sat like a stone in his stomach. Wrong. It felt wrong, deep in his bones. But the doubt had taken root, and the night stretched long before him. Morning brought no clarity, just the necessities of the farm. Animals needed tending, fences needed checking. Derek moved through his chores mechanically, the cloud of uncertainty following him. Around noon, his truck sputtered and died halfway down his longest fence line. He'd been meaning to check the fuel pump, but with everything happening. He swore softly, miles from the house with a gathering storm on the horizon. He was gathering his tools for the long walk back when he heard an approaching vehicle. A dusty pickup he didn't recognize pulled up, and a woman stepped out. Mid-30s, dark hair streaked with gray, work clothes that had seen better days. "Car trouble?" she asked, approaching with the confident stride of someone used to handling problems. "Fuel pump, I think," Derek replied, wariness in his voice. He didn't recognize her, and these days strangers meant trouble. She nodded. "I'm Sophia Vasquez. Just moved back to manage my uncle's place north of here." She gestured toward his truck. "Mind if I take a look? I used to be a mechanic before I tried being a lawyer." The mechanic part stuck better. Derek stepped aside, watching as she confidently opened the hood and began examining the engine. Her hands moved with practiced ease. "You're the Langston who's fighting Cross," she said. Not a question. Derek tensed. Word travels fast. Sophia nodded, still focused on the engine. "My uncle's place borders Silver Creek on the north end." "Cross wants that land, too." She glanced up. "My family's been fighting him for 3 generations. "Vasquez," Derek said, the name finally registering. "Roberto Vasquez's place? He was my grandfather. Uncle Miguel runs it now, but his health isn't good. She tightened something under the hood. Try it now. Derek turned the key, and the engine roared to life. Sophia closed the hood with a satisfied nod. "Thanks," Derek said, genuine gratitude in his voice. "What do I owe you?" She wiped her hands on a rag. "Information. What exactly is Cross after? It can't just be silver." Derek hesitated, then decided to trust her. "I think it's water rights. Control of the watershed." Sophia's eyes narrowed. "That makes sense. My grandfather always said there was something more valuable than silver under these hills." Rain began to fall as she continued. "Listen, Cross thinks he's got everyone scared. And he does, mostly. But not everyone feels that way from where I'm standing. There's a meeting tomorrow night, people who aren't ready to hand over the keys to the county just yet. Old Miller's barn, off Route 16, 8 o'clock. She climbed back into her truck. "You might want to be there." Derek watched her drive away, feeling something he hadn't felt in days, a small spark of hope. Maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought. That evening, as he tended to Lady and her colt, Derek found himself telling the mare about his day as he brushed her coat. "Funny thing, Lady," he said softly. "Sometimes help comes from places you least expect it." The colt pranced around his mother, strong legs already sure beneath him. Derek had named him Steadfast that morning. Some things needed to be named for what you hoped they'd become. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Cross wouldn't stop. The pressure wouldn't ease. But for tonight, Derek had found something he'd thought lost. The certainty that fighting was worth it, even if victory seemed impossible. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the dust from the land. Old Miller's barn stood weathered but solid a quarter-mile off Route 16, tucked behind a stand of pines that hid it from casual view. Derek arrived early, parking his truck alongside a handful of other vehicles he recognized. Ellen Harrow's station wagon, Bill Carter's delivery van, Martin Green's truck parked discreetly behind a shed. Inside, the barn had been cleared of equipment, hay bales arranged in a rough circle for seating. A lantern hung from a central beam, casting long shadows. Derek nodded to familiar faces, some meeting his eyes, others looking away quickly. The atmosphere was tense, charged with both fear and determination. Ellen Harrow approached, clasping his hand firmly. "Glad you came," she said. "Wasn't sure you would." "Sofia Vasquez made a convincing argument," Derek replied. Ellen smiled. "She tends to, known her since she was knee-high to a grasshopper, smart as a whip and twice as sharp." More people arrived, filling the barn with hushed conversations. Derek counted 15, then 20, far more than he'd expected. Martin Green stood near the door, keeping watch. When Sophia finally entered, conversations quieted. She moved to the center of the circle, no nonsense and direct. "Thank you all for coming. I know what it cost each of you to be here." Her eyes swept the gathering. "Some of you I know, some I don't. But we're all here for the same reason. Marcus Cross thinks he owns Silver Creek, and we disagree." She gestured toward Ellen. "Ellen has evidence that Cross's mining operation is a cover. His real target is controlling the watershed." Ellen stepped forward, spreading maps across an old workbench. These geological surveys were falsified. "There's no significant silver deposit under our land, but there is water, a lot of it." An older man Derek recognized as Harold Jenkins, who'd farmed north of town for 60 years, spoke up. "Cross has been buying water rights all over the state. Word is he's planning to sell to those big agricultural corporations down south. Or worse, Bill Carter added. Bottle it and ship it out of state while we face restrictions during dry years. Murmurs rippled through the group. Water had always been precious in these parts, the lifeblood of their farms and ranches. So, what can we do? Someone asked. He's got the council, the bank, half the businesses in town. But not all of them, Sophia replied. And not the law, no matter what he thinks. Martin Green cleared his throat. I've been sheriff here 30 years. Never much cared for politics, but I know wrong when I see it. He looked at Derek. Your father would have fought this, son. So would mine. The mention of his father straightened Derek's spine. The question is how, he said. Cross has made it clear what happens to people who stand against him. Together, Sophia said simply. We stand together. That's what he doesn't expect. For the next hour, they talked strategy. Ellen had contacts at the State Environmental Protection Office willing to investigate the falsified surveys. Harold Jenkins knew a water rights attorney in the Capitol. Bill Carter had customers who'd been similarly pressured by Cross and might join their cause. What about proof? Derek asked. We need hard evidence of what he's really planning. Sophia nodded. That's where you come in. Cross's survey crews are on your land. They're taking soil and water samples, not looking for silver. We need those samples. They're guarded, Derek reminded her. Not at night, Martin said quietly. Deputy Wilson isn't keen on overtime. The plan took shape. Derek would monitor the survey crews, identify where samples were being collected. Bill, whose feed deliveries wouldn't raise suspicion, would observe where equipment was stored. Ellen would prepare documentation for state officials. Others would quietly spread the word, building support. Cross thinks he's isolated us, Sophia said, as the meeting concluded. He doesn't understand that people like us, people with roots in this land, don't break so easily. As people began to leave, staggered departures to avoid drawing attention, Derek found himself standing with Sophia near her truck. Why are you doing this? He asked. You said you just moved back. She leaned against the truck, arms crossed. My grandfather used to tell me stories about this valley, how the creek ran silver in the moonlight, how the land had been in our family since before there was a town. Her eyes met his. Cross tried to force my grandfather out 30 years ago. Failed then, too. I never knew Roberto well, Derek admitted. My father respected him, though. High praise from a Langston, she said with a small smile. Our families weren't always friendly. Times change. Some things don't. She pushed off from the truck. Be careful, Derek. Cross plays for keeps. So do I, he replied. Over the next few days, a quiet resistance formed. Nothing dramatic, just small acts of solidarity. Ellen's newspaper ran a seemingly innocent article about water conservation that highlighted the importance of the Silver Creek watershed. Bill delivered feed to Derek's farm with supplies tucked underneath. Harold Jenkins and 3 other farmers requested formal environmental impact studies from the county. Derek observed the survey crews, noting their patterns, where they took samples, where they stored equipment. Each night, he relayed information to Sophia, who coordinated their growing network. On Thursday evening, Martin Green visited Derek's farm, ostensibly to check on a report of trespassing. Cross is getting nervous, Martin said, as they walked the property line. Called me into his office today, wanted to know if I'd heard about any troublemakers organizing. What did you tell him? That people around here mind their own business. Martin handed Derek a small device. From Ellen's nephew, who works in the environmental office, water testing kit. The samples need to be untampered. Derek nodded, pocketing the device. Tomorrow night. The crew leaves at 6, and the deputy usually follows within 30 minutes. That night, Derek sat on his porch, watching the stars emerge above the mountains. Lady and her colt grazed peacefully in the near pasture, untroubled by human concerns. Steadfast was growing stronger each day, his legs more certain beneath him. Derek thought about his father, who had worked this land until his heart gave out one autumn morning. About his grandfather, who had expanded the original homestead during the difficult years after the war. About all the Langstons who had called this valley home. And he thought about the people who had gathered in Miller's barn, people with their own histories, their own struggles, their own reasons to stand against Marcus Cross, not out of anger or rebellion, but out of love for something worth protecting. Tomorrow would bring risk. Cross wouldn't hesitate to use Derek's actions against him if he were caught. But sitting there, under the vast Montana sky, Derek felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. Some battles chose you, and once chosen, the only path was forward. The colt nickered softly to his mother, who responded with a gentle nuzzle, life continuing, unaware of the human struggles around it, but affected by them all the same. Derek watched them until the night grew cool, then went inside to prepare for what tomorrow would bring. The water samples Derek collected confirmed what they had suspected. Cross wasn't testing for silver, but for aquifer depth and water quality. Ellen's contact at the State Environmental Office analyzed the results, finding evidence of extensive underground water reserves far larger than previously documented. Armed with this evidence, plus the falsified geological surveys Cross had submitted to the council, Ellen published a front-page exposé in the Silver Creek Gazette. Silver Creek Watershed, the true treasure beneath our feet. The article detailed Cross's deception and his history of acquiring water rights throughout the state. The morning the article hit doorsteps, Derek received a call from Martin Green. "Cross is on his way to your place," Martin said, his voice tense, "with Robert and a couple of hired men. I'm heading there now, but I'm 20 minutes out." "I'll be ready," Derek replied, hanging up the phone. He'd known this confrontation was coming. Cross wasn't a man to retreat quietly once challenged. Derek checked on Lady and her colt, moving them to the barn for safety, then waited on his porch, the morning sun climbing above the eastern hills. 3 vehicles came up his drive, the familiar black SUV flanked by 2 pickup trucks. This time, when Marcus Cross stepped out, his controlled demeanor had cracked. His face was flushed with anger, a copy of the Gazette crumpled in his fist. "You've made a serious mistake, Langston," he called as he approached the porch, Robert and 2 men Derek didn't recognize following behind. "Libel is expensive. Ellen Harrow will lose more than her newspaper when I'm done." Derek remained seated, outwardly calm despite the tension coiling in his chest. "It's only libel if it isn't true, Marcus. Those water samples came from your own survey crews, working on my land without proper permission, I might add." "Those samples were private property." Cross's voice tightened. "You stole them. Trespassing works both ways." Derek finally stood, looking Cross directly in the eyes. This was never about silver mining. It was about controlling the water that feeds 3 counties. "Progress requires vision and sacrifice," Cross snapped. "This backward county has been stagnating for decades, while I've been building something that will last. That will matter. By lying to the people who live here, by threatening anyone who stands in your way?" Cross's composure slipped further. "I gave you a chance, Langston, a fair price for your worthless piece of dirt. But you had to play the hero." He gestured to one of the men who'd come with him. "Show him the court order." The man stepped forward, extending an official-looking document. Emergency injunction against Derek Langston for theft of private property and interference with authorized survey operations. Derek took the paper, but didn't look at it. You still don't get it, do you? This isn't just about me or my land anymore. What's it about, then? Cross's voice dripped with condescension. Your family legacy? Your father's precious principles? Look where those got him. Dead before his time, leaving you with a struggling ranch and a mountain of debt. Derek felt a flash of anger but kept it contained. It's about the truth, Marcus, and about people's right to decide their own future. He nodded toward the road, where a line of vehicles was approaching. And I'm not alone. One by one, trucks and cars pulled into Derek's yard. Ellen Harrow, Bill Carter, Harold Jenkins, and at least 24 others from their meeting at Miller's barn. Sofia Vasquez's truck led the procession. As they parked and got out, they formed a loose semicircle behind Derek, a silent statement of solidarity. Cross's face darkened. What is this? Some kind of backwoods intimidation tactic? No, Derek replied. Just neighbors standing together. Sofia stepped forward, a folder in her hand. Marcus Cross, my name is Sofia Vasquez. I represent the Silver Creek Watershed Protection Coalition, a legal entity formed under state law to protect public waterways. Another Vasquez, Cross sneered. Your grandfather was stubborn too. It didn't end well for him. Sofia's expression remained professional despite the provocation. I have here a state court injunction freezing all survey operations pending investigation of fraudulent permit applications. She held out the document. This takes precedence over your county injunction. Robert Cross stepped forward aggressively. This is private property. You're all trespassing. Actually, Martin Green's voice cut through as his sheriff's vehicle pulled up. They were invited by the property owner. He approached, badge gleaming in the morning sun. I, however, am here in an official capacity. Cross turned to Martin, confidence still etched in his features. Good. Arrest Langston for theft and property damage, and clear these people out. Martin shook his head. Not today, Marcus. I've got a warrant for your arrest, falsifying official documents, bribery of public officials, and conspiracy to defraud. He pulled out handcuffs. 3 council members came forward this morning. Seems your article struck a nerve, Ellen. For the first time, genuine shock registered on Cross's face. This is absurd. You can't. I can and I am, Martin said evenly. You have the right to remain silent. As Martin continued reciting the Miranda rights, a sound rose from the gathered community, not cheers or celebration, but a collective release of breath, a silent acknowledgement that something long broken was beginning to mend. Robert Cross lunged forward suddenly. This is bullshit. You think you've won? His eyes burned into Derek's. This isn't over, Langston, not by a long shot. Derek met his gaze steadily. Yes, Robert, it is. Your father made a choice to value profit over people, power over truth. Every choice has consequences. As Martin led a handcuffed Marcus Cross to his patrol car, Robert and the other men retreated to their vehicles, threats and promises of retribution hanging in the air. No one moved to stop them. This victory wasn't about humiliation or revenge, but about justice and restoration. The community remained in Derek's yard after the Cross contingent departed, the mood shifting from tension to cautious relief. Ellen explained that after her article, 3 council members had approached Martin, admitting Cross had bribed them to approve the mining permits and eminent domain measures. Their testimony, combined with the falsified surveys and water sample evidence, had been enough for the judge to issue the warrant. "It's not over," Ellen cautioned. "Cross has money and connections beyond Silver Creek. There will be legal battles ahead. But we'll face them together," Sophia added. "The coalition gives us legal standing to protect the watershed regardless of individual property lines." Derek looked at the people gathered in his yard, neighbors who had found the courage to stand against power and corruption, not out of self-interest, but out of love for something larger than themselves. Some he'd known all his life. Others, like Sophia, were new allies. But together they had accomplished what none could have done alone. As the gathering began to disperse, people approached Derek with handshakes, quiet words of thanks or support. No grand speeches or celebrations. That wasn't their way. Just the simple acknowledgement of shared struggle and shared victory. When only Sophia remained, she joined Derek on the porch. "Your father would be proud," she said simply. Derek nodded, looking out over his land, the land his grandfather had worked, his father had protected, and he had nearly lost. "There's still a lot to do," he said. "There always is," Sophia replied. "That's the cost of caring about something." Together, they watched as the sun reached its zenith above Silver Creek Valley, the water still flowing, still worth fighting for. 6 months passed. The aspens had turned golden on the hillsides, and the first dusting of snow had touched the highest peaks. Silver Creek Valley settled into a new rhythm, one built on shared victory and the hard work of rebuilding. Cross's arrest had sent ripples through the county. 3 council members resigned, facing their own legal troubles for accepting bribes. The bank underwent a thorough audit, revealing years of preferential treatment and selective enforcement of loan terms. Robert Cross had left town shortly after his father's arrest, selling most of their local holdings before disappearing to somewhere in Colorado. On a crisp October morning, Derek stood by his fence line, watching as a small group worked along the creek that cut through his property. The Silver Creek Watershed Coalition, now official with bylaws and a board of directors, was implementing a restoration project. Volunteers planted native willows to prevent erosion, while others constructed a simple monitoring station to track water quality and flow rates. Ellen Harrow approached, clipboard in hand. At 72, she moved more slowly these days, but her mind remained sharp as ever. "The University Extension Office wants to use our project as a case study," she said, pride evident in her voice. "Said they've never seen a community-led water conservation effort this comprehensive." Derek nodded. People protect what they understand. And what they fought for. The Silver Creek Gazette had continued its coverage long after Cross's arrest, educating readers about watershed management, water rights, and the complex ecology of the region. What had begun as resistance had transformed into stewardship. "Council meeting tonight," Ellen reminded him. "Budget vote for the new conservation easements." "I'll be there," Derek replied. He'd never seen himself as a public figure, had never sought leadership. But when the community had asked him to fill one of the vacant council seats, he'd accepted, not out of ambition, but out of the same sense of responsibility that had led him to protect his land in the first place. As Ellen walked back to her car, Bill Carter pulled up in his feed store truck. "Morning, Derek," he called, climbing out with a folder of papers. "Got those estimates you wanted for the South Pasture restoration." The survey crews had left scars on Derek's land, rutted tracks, disturbed soil, damaged fencing. Rather than simply repair it, Derek had decided to implement some of the conservation practices the coalition was promoting. Bill, whose feed store had expanded to include agricultural consulting, had helped design a plan that would improve grazing capacity while protecting the watershed. "Appreciate it, Bill," Derek said, taking the folder. "How's business?" Bill grinned. "Better than ever. Turns out, being on the right side of things is good for the bottom line. Half the county's looking to implement similar practices on their land." They walked the property line together, discussing drainage patterns and native grasses. Bill pointed toward the Vasquez property to the north. "Sophia's doing similar work over there. Miguel's letting her take the lead on the restoration." "That woman knows her stuff." Derek nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "She does." Bill gave him a knowing look, but said nothing. A courtesy among men who understood that some things didn't need to be spoken aloud to be understood. Later that afternoon, Derek walked his property, checking fences as he'd done countless times before. Lady grazed nearby, her colt, no longer a colt but a yearling now, growing strong and sure. He'd named the horse Steadfast, and the name had proven fitting. As he worked, Derek thought about the changes these past months had brought, not just to the community, but to himself. He'd always been a solitary man, content with his own company and the routine of the ranch. But the struggle against Cross had connected him to his neighbors in ways he'd never expected. He'd found allies, friends, even a sense of purpose beyond the boundaries of his land. The sound of an approaching vehicle drew his attention. Sophia Vasquez's truck came up the drive, dust rising behind it. Over these months, she'd become a regular visitor, her legal expertise proving invaluable to the coalition. But there was more to it than that, a connection neither of them had anticipated or sought. "Thought I'd find you out here," she called as she approached, a folder tucked under her arm. "Just got the final approval from the State Water Board. The Watershed Protection Zone is official." Derek smiled, a rare enough expression that those who knew him well noted each occurrence. "Your grandfather would be proud." "Yours too," she replied. They stood for a moment in comfortable silence, looking out over the land that 3 generations of both their families had, in their own ways, fought to protect. "There's something else," Sophia said finally. "Uncle Miguel's health isn't improving. He's asking if I'll take over the ranch permanently." Derek nodded, understanding the weight of such a decision. "Will you?" "I think so. Law was interesting, but this—" She gestured to the land around them. "This matters in a way nothing else has." "It does," Derek agreed, "though it's not always an easy life. The worthwhile things rarely are." She smiled then, a question in her eyes. "Which reminds me, I've got that section of fence that needs replacing on the north boundary, where our properties meet. Thought maybe we could tackle it together this weekend." Derek understood what she was really asking, not just about fence repairs, but about the connection that had been gradually building between them. 2 people who valued the same things, who saw the world through similar eyes. "I'd like that," he said simply. That evening at the council meeting, Derek watched as the community he'd known all his life continued its transformation. People who had once been silent now spoke up. Those who had stood apart now worked together. The Watershed Coalition had expanded its mission, addressing not just water conservation, but sustainable development, protection of wildlife corridors, and education programs for local schools. As Bill Carter presented the budget proposal for the conservation easements, protected land that would remain undeveloped in perpetuity, Derek thought about legacy. His father and grandfather had preserved their piece of this valley through their labor and commitment. Now, the entire community had embraced that same responsibility, extending it beyond individual property lines to encompass the ecosystem that sustained them all. When the meeting ended, Derek stepped outside into the cool autumn air. Stars spread across the sky, the same stars his ancestors had navigated by, had wished upon, had used to time their plantings and harvests. Some things remained constant, even as others changed. Martin Green joined him on the steps of the town hall. "Never thought I'd live to see Silver Creek pull together like this," the old sheriff said, looking out at the town square where people lingered, talking in small groups. "Turns out people just needed something worth fighting for," Derek replied. "Or someone to remind them what was already worth it," Martin countered, clapping Derek on the shoulder before heading to his truck. As Derek drove home along familiar roads, moonlight silvered the creek that gave the valley its name. He thought about the meeting he'd had earlier that week with a representative from the State Environmental Agency. The man had been impressed by the coalition's work, but puzzled by Derek's refusal to take full credit for starting it. "You stood up first," the official had said. "That counts for something." "Standing up doesn't matter much if you stand alone," Derek had replied. It was everyone else joining in that made the difference. And that was the truth of it, he reflected, as he turned down the road to his ranch. No man was meant to stand alone against the tide. The real strength came when people recognized that some things were worth protecting together. As he approached his house, Derek noticed a light on in the kitchen that he hadn't left burning. Through the window, he could see Sophia moving about, setting a kettle on the stove. She'd mentioned stopping by after the meeting, but he hadn't expected her to arrive before him. It struck him then, the simple comfort of having someone waiting, not out of dependence or obligation, but out of choice, out of shared purpose and growing affection. Derek parked his truck and paused for a moment, taking in the scene. His house, solid against the night sky, the barn where Lady and Steadfast rested. The land that stretched out around him, now connected in his mind not just to the past, but to the future as well. The door opened, spilling warm light into the yard. Sophia stood there, 2 mugs in her hands, her smile a question and an invitation. Derek walked toward the light, toward whatever tomorrow might bring. Some battles chose you. But sometimes, if you were fortunate, they led you to exactly where you needed to be. You know, I've seen a lot of folks over the years who faced that same choice Derek Langston did. Stand up for what's right, even when it costs you, or take the path of least resistance. It's never an easy decision, especially when you're standing alone at first. What strikes me about Derek's journey isn't just that he won against Marcus Cross. It's that he discovered something more valuable than silver beneath his land, the true worth of community. When people come together around something they believe in, there's a kind of strength there that money just can't buy. I'm reminded of something my grandfather used to say: "The measure of your life won't be what you gathered, but what you gave." Derek didn't set out to be a leader or a hero. He just couldn't turn away from what he knew was right, even when it would have been easier. And in doing so, he gave his neighbors something they'd lost: the courage to stand up for themselves and each other. We all face moments where the easy path beckons, where we can look the other way, tell ourselves it's not our problem. But the truth is, those moments define us. They show what we're made of, deep down where it counts. There's a lesson in Silver Creek that goes beyond water rights and land disputes. It's about remembering that what sustains us isn't just the resources beneath our feet, but the bonds between us. Derek learned that his inheritance wasn't just the land his father left him, but the values that came with it, and those values only grow stronger when shared. I've known men like Derek all my life, quiet, steadfast, not given to grand speeches or dramatic gestures, just doing what needs doing, day after day. It's easy to overlook such men until a crisis comes. Then you see what they're made of. Thank you for walking this trail with me. I hope Derek's story stays with you a while, like the echo of hoofbeats long after the writers have passed. And maybe next time you're faced with one of those defining choices, you'll remember that sometimes the real treasure isn't what's buried in the ground. It's found in the hearts of those who stand beside you when it matters most.